Labour have been very critical of the government's response to Carillion's collapse. What would Labour have done differently this week after they found out how much trouble Carillion was in if you'd been in government?
Well, I think what we would do and what we will do as soon as we are in government is look in a far more fundamental way at PFI, at outsourcing. And by the way,
and we'll get on to the principles of this. But if you had won the election in 2017, it would have been a Labour government that had to handle this collapse. What would have been different in your response?
I don't think we would have left it so late. I don't think we would have just soldiered on bailing out a company that already had raised serious warning signals in the city. I don't think we would have allowed them to get into subcontracting arrangements with, for example, Serco, worth, again, millions and millions of pounds when there are profit warnings against that company too. I mean,
but this is it now. So Serco are a big government provider. If you're saying the government should have intervened earlier with Carillion, should they be looking at all their contracts with the likes of Serco, who have also issued profit warnings?
I think you do need to look at all of these arrangements and the subcontracting arrangements. By the way, it's not because I'm ideologically opposed to the private sector, and it will be a lot of smaller private sector companies that will really suffer as a result of non-payment, for example, under contractual arrangements with these great big beasts.
So should they get some government help? I mean, we heard the man running the small business in the film there saying they might go to the wall unless there's some government help.
Quite possibly, but with accountability. And I think it's all very well for Mrs May to now say she's going to sting these executives. There's got to be a little bit of ministerial responsibility in all of this as well. And one of my concerns is that when vital public services of a kind that are almost constitutional, for example prisons, get contracted out, what you're actually devolving is ministerial responsibility. And then something goes terribly wrong, whether in a vital utility or whether it's a matter of security or infrastructure, and ministers of whatever colour just put their hands up and say it's wicked executives, it's the wicked company. And what we need is ministerial responsibility. What we need is oversight. Of course we want a thriving private sector, but some vital services need to be run by public servants and with ministers held to account.
Sometimes when you hear Labour shadow ministers talking about this, it sounds as though they want to take absolutely everything back into public ownership, all the catering, all the cleaning, every service.
I believe in a mixed economy, and I know that my colleagues do too. But there are times when some things need to be in public hands. Now that will include on constitutional grounds, where you're talking about people's human rights, people's basic security. That will also mean sometimes when you have a big organisation and outsourcing is used to grind down the working conditions of some workers and break down the sense of community and solidarity between them.
So where is it appropriate for there to be private contracts?
Well, where is it? Well, for example, you know, there are some things that the private sector probably does better. When you're running a police force, you're unlikely to say we'll make the motorbikes for the police officers better than BMW. Maybe you will, but I doubt that that's going to happen anytime soon. So you need to look at this.
But what about cleaning in the offices and the police stations? Well, should that be outsourced, or should that be actually run by the police?
I think that in some circumstances, I think maybe hospitals are a better example, because of course cleanliness in a hospital is quite often a matter of life and death. So I think sometimes it is better, even for something that seems, you know, not a core service like cleaning, to be in public hands. You just need to look at this on a case-by-case basis, both in terms of...
I don't hear very many examples of where you think it is appropriate for private companies to be involved. So you've discussed prisons and probation. What about catering in prisons? Does that have to be in public hands, or could that be done by a private company?
I think what you want to do is to look at the quality of the service, the quality of the conditions for the people working there, and to see what would be best value for the public and for the public purse. It's not ideological, but in some cases there are principles at stake. I do agree.
And we are still left with the problem here of workers who are worried about their pension, who've been working for Carillion, and subcontractors who may not get paid. If the government were to talk about putting some taxpayers' money into helping out either those people or those companies, would the Labour Party object?
I think we would want to look at what the conditions are of spending public money.
But in principle, you could spend public money on people. It's not the fault of the subcontracting small companies who are now not going to get paid.
Well, indeed, but you want accountability. If you do decide to spend public money, for example, to help those smaller businesses, you want some accountability in response. And you might well want to legislate to give priority to pension funds, for example, over shareholders who have not really done their job of corporate governance in these cases.
We'll move on and talk about something else, if you don't mind, the John Warboys case, the serial sex attacker. Yeah. This time last week, we were sitting here talking about the fact that the Justice Minister said he would launch a judicial review. Now he said that he won't because there's little chance of it succeeding.
Indeed.
Should the government be pursuing a judicial review? Would Labour if they were in power?
My view at the time, and I decided to sort of hold my tongue about it because I'm used to politicians waving in a kind of knee-jerk way when there's a case of this kind. My view is that if there is to be a judicial review of the parole board decision, the best person to bring such a judicial review would be a victim, because the chances are their best arguments would be under the Human Rights Act, which gives rights to victims and not to politicians. So I think
and there's a crowdfunding attempt to raise the money to do that.
Frankly, if the Justice Secretary wants to make a name for himself with this as a new Justice Secretary, he might better give his attentions to making sure that people have decent levels of legal aid so that they can vindicate their rights under the Human Rights Act. I also think, in relation to the Warboys case and the crisis of public confidence that it's in danger of creating, we could do with an end-to-end review of the whole case, from the moment a young woman went to the police and was disbelieved to the moment this release decision was made, arguably with a lack of transparency and involvement of victims.
Because he was prosecuted for offences against 12 women, and we know there were almost 100 other women who came forward, but the CPS say they can't go forward with those cases. They looked at them, they decided there wasn't enough evidence, and they can't revisit that decision. If there wasn't enough evidence then, there won't be enough evidence now.
I want to look at I'm not second-guessing the particular CPS decisions, because I'm not in a position to do that, but I do think that there are issues for the whole system. From the moment that a woman went to the police and was not treated with the respect that she deserved, to the moment that this release decision was made, it would seem, on everyone's analysis, without proper input or consultation or even notice to victims.
Now, of course, it was Labour's Shadow Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer, who was the Director of Public Prosecutions at the time when the case was prosecuted, and he said he didn't have any involvement in the decision-making behind it.
Nor did his predecessor, he says, but that's not
But they should have done, shouldn't they? Shouldn't the DPP have been looking at something? You've got over 100 women reporting that this man has raped them, and he's prosecuted for only 12 cases. The DPP should be involved in that.
Whoever was the DPP, my argument is that this whole story and this whole case and the numbers of women involved and, frankly, the anxiety that this decision has caused to women who weren't even victims means there needs to be an end-to-end review of how the system has worked in this case, from the moment a woman went to the police and was arguably not believed to the moment that this release decision was made without the input of victims, who I would expect to be at least given notice and the opportunity to make representations to the parole board.
There's a story running in the Sunday Times this morning about Momentum, saying that they're trying to deselect 50 Labour MPs.
An anonymous source has given... look...
Yeah, now, of course, the fact of the matter is Momentum, where there have been parliamentary selections, Momentum candidates have won only in 5 of the last 25 selections. Does that not worry you? Do you not think that, actually, the Labour Parliamentary Party should better reflect the membership in Corbyn's leadership?
Look, my understanding is that Momentum is not prioritising the selection of some candidates over others. They are, an invigorated movement, part of the Labour movement, which has always had various strands within it. What is exciting to me, it's clearly not exciting to the Sunday Times, fair enough, is that we've now got about 600,000 members. And we have a democratic party that's becoming more democratic.
So you must want the MPs to be more in tune with the membership, because there is still a massive disconnect between those who sit in Parliament and those who've joined the party since Corbyn became leader.
Well, I think these things can be exaggerated. I've personally, in the Palace of Westminster, noticed a real change since the general election. People uniting around a sense of purpose, not least around scandals like Carillion. So fair enough, it's a good story for the Sunday Times, but I don't really spot this red menace in the way that other people do. This is a democratic party. It's a mass popular movement of about 600,000 people, and I think that's something to be quite optimistic about.
All right. Well, Shami Chakrabarti, thanks very much for talking to us this morning, and I shall turn back to the panel and start with you, Steve. I mean, should Labour MPs be worried that Momentum are coming to try and deselect them, or is this being rather overblown? They haven't been that successful thus far in doing so.
Yeah, no, I think it's been overblown just on the basis of the evidence. I mean, you quoted it then of the selection procedures that's taken place so far. They haven't prevailed that often, and in the Sunday Times today they resorted to the example of Haringey Council, where I happen to live, where there are a lot of specific local issues. So at this point, it is not at all clear whether deselection will become the overwhelming theme over the next few years in the Labour Party. It might do, but the evidence so far is that it's much more nuanced than some newspapers are suggesting. 3
new Momentum-backed members on the ruling body of the Labour Party, the NEC, this week. That's going to make a difference, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely huge difference, because Jeremy Corbyn and his wing of the party can now do precisely what they want. And as long as they have union muscle behind them during conference votes, which formalise decisions made by the NEC, then the party, and any which way he wants to run it, is his. I disagree with Steve. I think, you know, the difference in language that Jeremy Corbyn and his very close associates were using after the NEC elections this week on mandatory reselections. Shami wasn't actually asked whether she thoroughly believed in them or not. Jeremy Corbyn was, Rebecca Long-Bailey also was, and both of them, crucially, refused to rule them out and refused even to say they were a bad thing. Simply that we hadn't taken that decision yet, we're not there yet. In my view, it is without doubt that Jeremy Corbyn will at some stage try and reshape the Parliamentary Labour Party more in his image. And you may well argue, Shami's views would be interesting, you know, why on earth should he not do that?
And Shami was saying that the party is much more united around Jeremy Corbyn. And when we see a story like Carillion this week, it's much easier, isn't it, for him to get the backing of the Parliamentary Party and look like a more united force.
I think that's right. But I mean, back to what we were talking about before, how unpleasant and how ugly and how divisive is it to have these stories out, whether or not they're completely accurate or, you know, whoever is briefing. I think it looks very, very bad on the atmosphere of the Parliamentary Party. Where I do think that Shami has a good point is on the size of the Labour membership, you know, 600,000. I mean, the Conservatives can only dream of getting a fraction of this. So clearly there is a big problem for the Tory party there in matching what Labour is doing.
OK, and so before we leave this, we should ask you, Shami, mandatory reselections for Labour MPs, are you in favour?
I think that there should, whatever democratic process there should be across the board and for everyone. My experience is that where MPs are doing a good job, including working with their membership, and you have to work with your membership to get the vote out in the Labour Party, you know, that relationship works well, and I think that relationship will only work better into the future. I've been all over the country. I've been to all sorts of CLPs campaigning in recent times, not least because I don't have a constituency myself. And I think you'd be surprised at the number of places where there's actually a very happy relationship between the MP and the party, regardless of the particular strand that they come from.
All right, Shami, thank you very much for that.